And happy Monday. It is Car Con Carne, still held in quarantine, Quarantine Con Carne, sponsored by C&H Financial Services. As business owners continue to open back up to serve their communities, they're faced with a lot of challenges as they navigate through this new normal brought on by the coronavirus. C&H Financial Services is here to help. They offer a variety of products ranging from traditional merchant accounts to zero-cost payment processing solutions, which eliminate the expenses associated with accepting Visa, MasterCard, Discover, and American Express as a form of customer payment. C&H Financial Services eTab solution is easy to set up for your business if you want to do online ordering or curbside pickup. C&H also offers cost-effective commercial lending programs, which can help get your business the money it needs to make it through these goofy times. To learn more, contact C&H Financial Services at 855-600-2437 or go to www.chfs.us. My guest tonight, it's a very special day. He is Kevin Canchola. He is the Midwest Ambassador of Glenfiddich Scotch. And on this wonderful event, I want to wish you a happy National Scotch Day.
Cheers. Happy National Scotch Day to you as well, James. In Scots Gaelic, they would say Slán Trevá, but it's a toast meaning to good health. So Slán Trevá.
I could have had you on any day, but National Scotch Day was really the important time to have you on. And I like you've got your product placement ready to go. Let's start there. What do you have right in front of the camera?
I mean, this is the icing on the cake for me. It's about 8:30 p.m. here in Chicago. So it's the end of my National Scotch Day, and I wouldn't have it any other way than to go out with, I'm actually going to let you decide when we get to that, but I have a 21 year, and I have the Grand Cru, two phenomenal single malt scotches from Glenfiddich, the brand that I represent. And that's just kind of my nightcap, and that's how I plan on ending my night tonight.
Well played. And again, it's Glenfiddich. I think that let's just start there. The rookie move, it's not Glenfiddich, which we want to say in Chicago. We want to say Glenfiddich Scotch.
Don't you know, right? Uh-huh. I've heard that. I've heard it butchered so many times, but at the end of the day, the brand is a Scotch from Scotland, and the term Glenfiddich is Scots Gaelic, and we don't speak Scots Gaelic here in Chicago. I mean, I don't know if we really speak English here either, but it's definitely not Scots Gaelic. So I no ill will towards anyone who mispronounces it, but you got it absolutely correct. It is Glenfiddich.
So I can get myself Glenfiddich when I go to the Jewels, right?
When you go to the Jewels, yes.
I can get a Glenfiddich over there. So you're a Chicago guy. Is Chicago a Scotch town?
100%. I mean, I think we're about 5 hours from Louisville. So we all start with American whiskey. It's readily accessible. It's super easy to get to. And that's kind of how I got my start in the industry, working in a whiskey bar here. And I started with American whiskey. And I think that anybody who, doesn't really likes to go on and continue to find depth and complexity will eventually stumble on a single malt scotch in one way or another.
All right, I want to talk about single malt and explaining what is so attractive about that. But you mentioned your start. Was that Three Aces where you started?
Oh my gosh, did somebody tell you that?
I do research.
Yeah, I was a food runner at Three Aces, and our shift drinks were a terrific price because we worked a hard shift and deserved them. But Old Crow whiskey was $1 for everybody, no matter what. So you definitely ended up a couple 2 Triados before you left the building.
Yeah, I love that place. I went there for brunch once. I want to say I had a killer eggs Benedict like 5 years ago.
The menu was great. The burger was phenomenal. Bolognese fries, great food, great drinks.
So moving on from there, you tended bar a handful of Chicago places, right?
Yeah, and from there I went on, because I was only running food there. I went on to the Pump Room when it was Ian Schrager and Chef John George. So Chef John George from John George's New York, a few other restaurants in New York. He came to Chicago with his first endeavor here. And Ian Schrager, who was responsible for Studio 54 once upon a time, he's the guy who didn't go to jail, and he was a famous hotelier. So they had their partnership here, and in true Chicago style, they wanted to create something that was inclusive of all. So I learned a great deal about cocktails there, food pairings, things like that. I did dabble in whiskey there, but I left there and went on to another hotel, the Dana Hotel, and I became a manager there. And that's when I was privy to, any education I wanted. People were pursuing me. They wanted to get on my menu, so they would seek me out. And if you believe it or not, it got better when I went on to Drum Bar at the Raphael Hotel, because Drum Bar had just become a top 10 whiskey bar in the nation, according to GQ magazine. And everybody wanted to be on our menu. So I could have any whiskey whether it be single malt, blended Scotch, American whiskey, bourbon, or rye, whenever I wanted. So yeah, I mean, I had all this whiskey in front of me, and I kept thinking to myself, this is great. American whiskey is great. I love it, but there are a ton of similarities, and there weren't so many nuances I was finding. So I stumbled on a single malt Scotch. Of course, it was through a tasting while I was at Drum Bar, and it was a light bulb moment for me, honestly, for my palate, because it was an eruption of flavor. True story. My first tasting was an actual Glenfiddich tasting, and I'm not just saying that. I've worked for other single malt companies, and I love other single malts as well. But it was my first tasting, and they kind of reeled me in right there. It was a ton of flavor, and I absolutely loved it.
Well, let's go from there. Single malt. Define single malt.
Yeah, it's all in the name, and it's super simple. People tend to overcomplicate it like everything else, but it's single. So it's coming from one distillery. So when we talk about some of our more complex whiskeys, we like to tell you, hey, this whiskey's been aged in X bourbon cask, but then we finish it in a sparkling wine cask like this bottle right here. And people say, well, isn't that a blend? And as long as all the juice, all the liquid comes from one distillery, it's single. Malt is really important because most American whiskeys until recently were not made from malted grain at all. Your corn wasn't malted, your rye, your wheat wasn't malted. Now Americans are kind of starting to do this process, and they're making some really, really good American single malts, but that's a brand new category. So malted is a whole other step to whiskey making that is traditional throughout Scotch's entire history. So single malt Scotch, and Scotch just means, hey, it's whiskey, it's from Scotland.
There it is. So you discovered it. You discovered this flavor explosion with single malt. What is it about Glenfiddich that you like so much?
Glenfiddich is so versatile. So for one, when I was not working for Glenfiddich, I was working for another Scotch company, and I was hearing the things. You'd go to Scotland and you talk, you go to Speyside and you talk about who were the big kids on the block, and it was always Glenfiddich, and you're always happy to talk about Glenfiddich. But one thing, I can't tell you who it was, but a certain gentleman who was running a very prominent distillery said, I wish we ran our distillery like Glenfiddich. They have more whiskey stocks than anyone else on the planet. And I took a moment to think about what that means. And what that really means is that if our master distiller, Brian Kinsman, if he goes to sleep one night and has a dream about a crazy whiskey, he has the ability to wake up the next day and seek that out and make that happen and make it a reality, because they have so much whiskey stock. He can have experiments for days. And I absolutely love that. And the experiments that he's made over the years, this being probably one of the newest ones, this is a pretty new one as well. They're all brilliant expressions, and the flavor never ends. Again, why I love single malt Scotch.
All right, let's talk about what those two bottles are in front of you, because part of the appeal is certainly the packaging. It's a very inviting looking bottle in both cases. Let's start with the one on
the triangular
on
bottles.
your left.
Glenfiddich. We're the only ones to do that. We'll walk you through it a little bit. So Glenfiddich in Scotch Gaelic, there's a lot of glens out there, right? And it can be confusing for everyone, but a glen is actually an English term. It simply means valley. We just don't say glen anymore.
Right.
We just don't really say valley in the Midwest either, because there aren't many valleys here. Maybe Hidden Valley Ranch for some pizza, but that's another
That's right.
conversation, right?
The San Fernando Glen.
San Fernando Glen, exactly. Yeah. So this is a valley here, and Fiddick simply means deer, valley of the deer. They weren't mad scientists, so to speak, when they were creating these terms. They just called it what they saw around them. So Glenfiddich truly is Valley of the Deer. And the two bottles I have in front of me are the Grand Cru. For those who drink champagne, they know that Cru is a very important term to a very specific region of sparkling wine. And then we also have the Glenfiddich 21, which is a rum cask finish. So Glenfiddich typically finishes their whiskey for up to 6 months. It might go a bit longer, but throughout our entire core range, it will most likely go to 6 months. That's another thing that I truly love and respect about this whiskey. You have other single malt brands that are finishing their whiskeys for 2 or 3 years, which is almost contradictory to single malt Scotch. Oak is very important to us, but we understand how powerful it is. So it's almost, in some cases, especially the finishing process, I find that less is more. When you're finishing a whiskey in a specific cask, you're going to get a lot of influence. For instance, a rum cask or a sparkling wine cask, you're going to get a ton of influence from that. And at the end of the day, you still want to make a single malt Scotch. You don't want to make a rum, and you don't want to make a sparkling wine. So you want a subtle influence. It's almost like the finishing salts on a dish.
But so it sounds like comparing the rum and the champagne, both would add a sweetening something to the Scotch, but different types of sweetening.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And again, it would depend on the whiskey as well, because you do have some overproof whiskeys. You tend to find them more in American whiskeys. And I used to joke around that American whiskeys are out to just hurt your palate, which is totally untrue. It's kind of a little jab at them. And I love my overproof whiskeys. But the truth about lower ABV whiskeys, for instance, Glenfiddich is predominantly 40%, almost all the way through. You can't hide flavor in a lower ABV whiskey. It's going to shine through. So if you have a good whiskey, great. If you have a bad whiskey, you can't mask that with anything. So that's what I love about the lower ABV. So yes, you're right. With a rum cask or a sparkling wine cask, you're going to get some sweetening and depth of flavor components in there.
But very different kinds.
1,000%. And again, it's not just geographically, but that is a big part of it, right? You're going to a Caribbean rum cask, you're going to get a completely different flavor. And then if you were to source these barrels, where I can't say specifically where we got them, but let's say somewhere in Europe that makes a ton of sparkling wine, that's going to be different climate, different region, different oak, and a ton of different flavor.
Is it tough? I know the answer to the question before I ask it, but is it tough not being able to do your ambassadorly duties right now, not fly off to the mothership in Scotland, not be able to turn people onto this stuff around the country?
It's extremely tough, because I have not been to Scotland, because I started, believe it or not, with Glenfiddich in March. So
oh my gosh,
what a whirlwind that's been.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So I've been.
They probably just sent you a case of Scotch and said, "Here you are. We'll be in touch. Don't go anywhere."
You know what? It wasn't too far off from that. And I don't know if you can see. I've got an array of Glenfiddich here on my shelves, and it's just kind of like, okay, do your R&D. And thankfully enough, I've worked in this industry as an ambassador for other brands for 5 years, and Glenfiddich has never been too far away from my palate. But it's been as they've made it as great as it can be for me right now. But I'm still dying to get to Scotland. I dream about it once or twice a week. And as far as not seeing people, sheesh, man, I tell you, I'm a bit like Tinkerbell. If you don't get attention, you die. I need human interaction, not so much the attention, but I need human interaction, the embrace, a toast. Turning someone on to a new whiskey face to face for the first time. There's not anything quite like that.
And I totally get it. I mean, my job, I like turning people on to music, and different sort of thing, but there is a thrill to being able to kind of get that light bulb going in someone. Like, oh, I get this. I love 100%. This. Thank you.
My father and I, he was the authoritarian, true Southside family. Mom let me get away with everything. Dad, grounded me. I'm in trouble. You start to sweat when he comes home. But we truly, truly bonded around the time I turned 18, when he started taking me to rock school. And this was basically him just playing records for me in the living room on a Friday night, not allowing me to go out for weeks on end until I learned all of his favorite bands.
Give me a for instance.
All right, so I'll give you his top three, and one of them I have tattooed on my leg. Rush, Thin Lizzy, and Judas Priest.
Those are some dad bands, but I love Rush.
Yes, we went to see Rush together. I took him. We share a birthday coming up August 13th. And once upon a time I took him, and I've never heard my dad yell out of happiness. And I definitely heard him cheering that night. He's a drummer, and he's a Neil Peart fanatic.
Oh, for sure. And the great thing about going to see Rush, you get your money's worth. They played for like 6 hours.
Every time. And there's no lack of enthusiasm, no laziness. They're going to play perfectly every time. It's brilliant.
Exactly right. Well, thinking about being in and around the Chicago hospitality industry as long as you have, how are things going? I mean, you have contacts throughout the business. This is such a weird, crappy, unprecedented time. How's the industry holding up? How are the people in your contact list doing?
It's a tough time for everybody in the industry, period. I can't say that enough. I think everyone needs to take a minute and think about that. It's a very, very hard and tough time right now. There are people who still haven't seen a dime of their unemployment. In fact, a good friend of mine and chef who lives down the street, who worked for a very prominent group. He was the head chef for one of their top tier restaurants. And he did not see anything, and it's not their fault, obviously it's not anyone's fault really. It's just a problematic time right now. He didn't see anything until about 2 weeks ago. So it's a tough time for everyone. It's a tough time. I can't even say it's a tough time for me because, thankful for my lucky stars, I work for, a family run company who understands what this is a tough time for everyone and make sure that I have work to do. But for the industry in general, if they are able to work, it's a scary time. And if they're unable to work, it's a scary time because they're not getting money. And I mean, I can't say that enough. It's a tough time right now.
Totally agree. How does Chicago stack up with other markets that you travel to as a restaurant city?
Oh my God. So I lived in Miami for a year. So when learning about, your podcast and what you did, I would die to get that food tour. I couldn't get a beef sandwich to save my life. Chicago dog, some tavern style thin crust, cheese and sausage pizza. And I live in Pilsen, so I'm half Latino, so tacos and carnitas and all just Latin food for days. I think Chicago is a huge food town. I'm as humble as it gets until it comes to me talking about my city, because we're a terrific food town.
All right, so back to National Scotch Day. Are we going to watch you drink something?
Yeah, you know what?
We're going to live vicariously. Hey,
James,
pour yourself a drink.
I truly wish that we could be enjoying a dram together, and I promise that that'll happen one day in the future. But I'll let you go ahead and pick. What do you think? Should I go ahead and do the 21 or the Grand Cru?
The 21 sounds really exciting to me.
Cheers.
This is where we're at. Life under COVID-19. Just pull up a video and watch someone drink for you.
Do you remember those old Chili's commercials where would say it was like smell-o-vision and you could scratch the TV?
That we're just going to watch you drink scotch.
This is kind of how we're doing it here. Let me tell you that it's a bouquet of fresh fruit on the nose. Tons of fruit notes. Vanilla notes are going to be prominent in any brown spirit. I like to tell people that whether you're a beginning, amateur, novice whiskey drinker, if you're in a room full of whiskey drinkers and they're asking people for tasting notes, or you get picked on the spot and you're nervous, if it's a brown spirit, you can say vanilla and you're going to be right 100% of the time. So
just pro tip.
Just start there. If you want to get a little more advanced, if it's American oak, you can say cherry and you can say coconut, because those are most likely going to be part of it.
I love that.
But the fruit typically takes me back to the Midwest. I get a lot of Midwestern fruit. I get a lot of, I get cherries, apples, and that's because of my time as a kid on Michigan farms, because I had a cousin who lived up there. And I remember walking through cherry orchards, through apple orchards, and I remember what that smells like. I remember it like it was yesterday. And there's a lot of good whiskeys out there that have similar smells. And we're drinking a 21 year. So people who are afraid of Scotch, the number one misnomer is that they're all smoky. And that's 100% untrue. There's a very tiny little region called Islay, and that's where 90% of the smoky whiskeys come from. We are from Speyside, which I made up a false statistic when I said, 90% of smoky whiskeys, but Speyside truly has roughly 50% of all Scotch in general. And it's one town. It's kind of ridiculous. But Speyside are known for having, grassy, earthy notes, fruit notes, really bright citrus flavors to begin with. So you're going to find that in a Speyside. But no smoke unless we purposely do that. And we only really did that recently with the Fire and Cane release. So no smoke in here. I'd say this is a beautiful fruit bomb. And 21-year-old Scotch, alcohol burn is something that we all live with. It's going to happen with everything you drink. It's almost non-existent in this whiskey.
Wow. Yeah. Sold, Kevin. All right,
so I'll have to drama this for you at some point. I promise you that.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Kevin Canchola, you are the ambassador for Glenfiddich, the Midwest ambassador. Thank you for sharing some of your National Scotch Day with us. I know it's an important day for you. Actually, it's an important day for all of us. Let's be honest.
I agree.
All right. So I'm going to stop the Facebook Live. Thank you very much for doing this.
My pleasure.